Will Smith sat at the wide oak desk in his quiet study, the glow of a solitary desk lamp illuminating the papers stacked around him. Outside, a faint drizzle tapped against the window. It was past midnight, yet his mind refused to rest. Though he had achieved countless milestones, awards, acclaim, and the respect of fans around the globe, something intangible tugged at him, a subtle emptiness that no spotlight could fill. He wanted to do something different, to engage with the world beyond the film sets and red carpets. In that reflective mood, he noticed a small, unmarked package resting atop his mail stack. Its plain brown wrapping bore no return address, just his name scrawled in neat black ink. He frowned, uncertain how it had slipped past his usual security checks, yet he felt an odd compulsion to open it. Using a letter opener, he carefully slit the tape and removed a padded envelope from within. Nestled in a layer of tissue paper was a simple silver key attached to a short note on worn parchment. The note read, "Mr. Smith, I have observed your spirit of curiosity and generosity. If you wish to discover something truly extraordinary, bring this key to the old gate on Woodvale Estate in northern Vermont. There's a matter of grave importance waiting for you there. No further instructions can guide you. Only your courage can." A traveler for a moment, Will simply stared at the key's metallic gleam. He almost laughed, thinking it a prank or a misguided piece of fan mail. Yet the letter's tone was eerily earnest. The reference to grave importance caught his attention. Despite years of interactions with admirers and well-wishers, this was something else. He sensed that whoever wrote the note knew his unspoken thirst for new experiences. The next morning, he showed the note to his trusted assistant, Jada, coincidentally sharing a name with someone else from his life, but not the same person, merely a loyal staffer. Though Jada was alarmed by the cryptic message, Will reassured her that he had a good feeling about it. He wanted to investigate, but he also wanted to maintain discretion. Perhaps it was just a whim, or maybe it was exactly the kind of quest he needed. Within days, he quietly rearranged his schedule, pushing back meetings, skipping certain events, and hopped onto a small, private flight to Burlington, Vermont. He told only a handful of close associates that he needed a break in a peaceful corner of the countryside. The entire journey felt surreal, as though he was stepping out of his well-orchestrated life and into a secret realm he had no idea existed. Upon landing, he rented a modest SUV, preferring not to attract attention. The drive north took him along winding roads flanked by tall pines and rolling hills. Autumn had come early to Vermont. The foliage glowed in russet and gold. Will found himself soothed by the beauty, each turn of the road offering glimpses of farmland and small hamlets. Yet the instructions guided him beyond any typical tourist route. He passed old barns, hushed forests, and finally reached Woodvale Estate, a gated property rumored to be deserted for decades. Stepping out of the SUV, he spotted the gate, ornate iron scrollwork that soared nearly 10 feet high. Weather and time had rusted the metal in patches, giving it a forlorn appearance. No sign announced ownership or caretaker. Quiet reigned, broken only by the rustling leaves in the breeze. Will approached the tall gate, the key in his palm. He slid it into the heavy padlock that secured the chain wrapped around the bars. To his surprise, it turned smoothly, clicking open with a soft snap. The chain clattered to the ground, leaving him to nudge the gate. Metal groaned on its hinges, revealing a leaf-strewn pathway vanishing among towering maples. The entire estate seemed enveloped by an otherworldly hush, as though it slumbered, awaiting a visitor to awaken it. Hand in his jacket pocket, Will followed the path into the property. Thick moss-covered old stone benches. A dilapidated carriage house peeked out from behind an overgrown hedge. The hush magnified every crunch of gravel beneath his boots. Though a twinge of apprehension sparkled in his mind, he was determined to see this through. Ahead, the path ended in a wide courtyard overshadowed by an immense mansion. Its architecture was a peculiar blend of colonial and Victorian, with tall gables, shuttered windows, and carved flourishes. The structure loomed in the gloom, imposing even in its state of decay. Weathered wood, cracked paint, and boarded-up doors suggested no one had lived there for a long time. Yet the intangible sense of waiting remained, as if the old house recognized his arrival. He tested the main door, locked. Circling around, he discovered a small side entrance with a tarnished brass knob. It turned with a squeak, and the door opened onto a narrow hallway filled with stale air and the faint smell of damp wood. A wave of adrenaline surged in him. Should he call out? "Hello?" He ventured, voice echoing down the corridor. No answer came. Dust motes swirled in the faint daylight, streaming through cracks in the shutters. Floorboards groaned beneath his steps as he navigated the corridor lined with tattered wallpaper. He passed a sitting room with cloth-draped furniture, an empty fireplace, and battered shelves. Eventually, the hallway led him to a spacious foyer dominated by a grand staircase sweeping to the second floor. A battered chandelier hung overhead, missing half its crystals. The house felt like a place suspended in time. He recalled the letter's mention of something of grave importance. Where was it? And who was the traveler? The key that had opened the gate still rested in his jacket, but now he noticed a second object tied to it, an etched metal disc with cryptic symbols. He hadn't seen it before. The disc must have been hidden in the key's bow or overshadowed by his excitement. Curious, we'll examine the lines. They formed a pattern that resembled a puzzle or a geometric puzzle, possibly a clue. At that moment, footsteps sounded overhead. Will tensed, heart-pounding. The steps were soft, deliberate, and they ended abruptly. He called out again, "Hello? Is anyone here?" No response. Yet, the dust in a narrow beam of sunlight dancing near the banister told him he was no longer alone in this silent house. Chapter 2. A hidden legacy. Will Smith gathered his composure and ascended the grand staircase, each step creaking ominously. The sense of stepping into a long-forgotten story sent a tingle through him. He had read scripts set in haunted mansions, but this was reality. No camera rolling, no safety net. With each step, the hush in the house pressed around him, heightening his awareness. The second-floor landing featured multiple closed doors. Antique sconces lined the walls, their glass covers dusty and cracked. Faded portraits hung askew. One painting, depicting a stern-faced woman in 19th-century attire, appeared to watch him as he passed. The footsteps he had heard moments ago were gone, leaving only a lingering sense that someone or something was guiding him. He paused at the first door on the left, turned the handle, locked. The next was an empty bedroom, its once elegant four-poster bed sheathed in cobwebs. He moved on, trying another door that led into a small library with floor-to-ceiling shelves. Books, some ancient, some more recent, lined the space, spines sagging under thick dust. A single window let in a shaft of gray light, illuminating a battered mahogany desk in the center. As he entered the library, an odd motion in his peripheral vision made him whirl around. A shape darted across the doorway. Human or shadow, he couldn't tell. He hurried back to the landing, peering into the corridor. Nothing, yet a distinct hush had fallen, as though the mansion itself held its breath. Returning to the library, he thought of searching the volumes for a clue. Then he spotted a narrow door behind the desk, perhaps a closet or secondary passage. This door, unlike the others, was marked by a symbol that almost mirrored the etched disc attached to his key ring. The realization sent a chill through him. He retrieved the disc, aligning it with the carved sign on the door. The patterns matched perfectly. Cautiously, he turned the knob. This hidden door glided open with unexpected ease, revealing a narrow spiral staircase descending into darkness. A cold draft swept upward, carrying the faint mustiness of subterranean air. Will switched on his phone flashlight and stepped down, each step resonating with a hollow echo. Beneath the mansion, an entire secret floor beckoned him, one that might explain why he had been lured here. The circular staircase opened into a vast chamber reminiscent of a museum vault or private archive. Rows of crates, old trunks, and tall shelves brimming with artifacts stretched into the gloom. Cobwebs draped corners, but enough space had been cleared to walk among the items. Ancient maps, rolled parchments, and locked boxes seemed to await an attentive eye. Dim electric bulbs, perhaps decades old, still lined the ceiling. Miraculously, they buzzed to life when he found and flicked a switch on a circuit box near the entrance. In the sudden glow, he saw the enormity of this collection. Suits of armor from various eras, old scientific instruments, paintings in gilded frames, everything carefully stored. On one trunk lay a black-and-white photograph of a man wearing late Victorian fashion, standing before the Woodvale mansion. Scrawled on the back were the words, Edgar Woodvale, 1889. So this estate belonged to a family named Woodvale. But what was it all doing here? Crouching by a large crate, Will noticed a curious label. Property of W.H. 1902. Expedition returns. He pried open the lid, revealing carefully padded relics. An ornate dagger with a jeweled hilt, fragments of pottery etched with unfamiliar hieroglyphics, and a small golden statue shaped like a falcon. The craftsmanship was exquisite. This was no random antique stash. Someone had gathered valuable, possibly unique, historical pieces from around the world. It dawned on him that the mansion's owners must have financed expeditions or explorations, hoarding their findings in secret. Perhaps they were archaeologists or collectors of hidden knowledge. It made the note's mention of grave importance ring even more true. Could these relics be dangerous in the wrong hands, or hold secrets beyond ordinary comprehension? He noticed a modest table with a ledger lying open, ink faded but legible. Its pages listed items brought back from various voyages. Obsidian mirror, recovered from Peru. Ancient scroll, origin unknown. Sarcophagus amulet, rumored to hold curses. The final pages bore scattered references to the pendant of Ushkur, marked with repeated underlines. Every mention described it as a key to the realm of the unseen or herald to those chosen. Eerily cryptic. At the bottom of one page, a signature, Edgar Woodvale. Next to it, a note scribbled in shaky script. We must protect the pendant of Ushkur at all costs. The prophecy warns that if it is claimed by the undeserving, darkness will ensue. If found, only the pure of heart can unlock its power for good. Will paused, heartbeat intensifying. Could that be the reason for the modern note that summoned him? Did he unwittingly hold a role in this prophecy? The concept sounded fantastical, like a plot from a high-stakes adventure film. Yet here he stood, in a neglected underground chamber, confronted by evidence of a legacy that stretched back centuries. He turned the page and froze. A sketch of the very disc attached to his key was drawn in the margin, labeled Initiate's Mark. This sealed the realization. The item in his possession was connected to something far bigger than he'd imagined. The question remained, who had orchestrated this? And why choose him? As if in response, the overhead lights flickered and a door at the far end of the chamber clicked open. A faint glow emerged, accompanied by footsteps. Tension coiled in Will's chest. Someone was here. He ducked behind a stack of crates, peeking around to see a tall figure step into the room. The figure wore a tailored coat and gloves, scanning the shelves with calculated precision. Will observed the intruder rummaging through trunks, seemingly searching for an object. The man muttered curses under his breath in a voice laced with an elegant accent. After a few minutes, he brandished a box from a corner, opening it to reveal a gem-encrusted pendant on a thin gold chain. From Will's vantage, the pendant resembled the pendant of Ushkur described in the ledger. The man's eyes gleamed with triumph. A surge of protective instinct flared in Will. The note he read earlier claimed the pendant could herald darkness if it fell into the wrong hands. And here was a stranger, unambiguously rummaging with malevolent intent. But how to intervene without endangering himself? He took a steadying breath, adrenaline spiking. This was not a scripted scene or choreographed stunt. It was real. He needed to do the right thing. Silently, he moved closer, but the intruder must have sensed movement. He spun around, facing Will's hiding spot. A grim smile flicked across his face. Well, the man said softly, English accent revealing wry amusement. Seems I'm not the only one lured by the mansion's treasures. Will rose to full height, heart hammering, fists clenched. "I don't know who you are, but that pendant doesn't belong to you." The intruder chuckled. "Ownership is a trifling matter. Power belongs to whomever can harness it. If you've come for the same reason, I suggest you step aside. This artifact is far beyond your comprehension, actor or not." Shock flickered across Will's mind. The man recognized him. Perhaps he even orchestrated the note. But his cold eyes told a different story, one of greed unbound by morals. Glaring at the intruder, Will stood his ground. "You have no idea what you're messing with." "On the contrary," the stranger retorted, "I know exactly what it is. More than you. And I have no intention of letting you meddle." He moved as if to leave, the pendant gleaming in his grasp. Summoning courage, Will lunged, grabbing the man's arm. A short scuffle ensued, sending the box tumbling, relics clattering to the floor. The intruder was strong and trained, deflecting Will's attempts to wrest the pendant away. Each strike echoed through the subterranean vault. In a blur, the man knocked Will to the ground and dashed toward the exit. "You've chosen the losing side," he spat, before disappearing into the corridor. A door slammed, followed by footsteps fading up the spiral staircase. Breathing hard, Will scrambled to his feet. The intruder, whoever he was, had escaped with the very relic the Woodvale family had warned about. In that moment, Will realized the magnitude of what he had stumbled into. A bizarre legacy, a stolen artifact, and an ominous prophecy. The mansion's secrets were real, and now he was inextricably bound to them. He had a choice: flee and call the authorities, or continue unraveling this labyrinth of mysteries. Considering the relic was gone, he remembered the note's final line about courage. That settled it. He was not about to let the intruder disappear with something so dangerous. He'd find answers, recover the pendant if possible, and honor the trust, whatever cosmic trust it was, that had placed this burden in his hands. Determined, he set out to search the rest of the chamber, looking for any clue about the pendant's powers, its vulnerabilities, and how to get it back. Outside, the old mansion groaned as the wind rattled broken shutters, as if lamenting the relic's theft. Within Will's heart, a new resolve flared, like stepping onto a path with no promise of safety, but a purpose that resonated deeper than any script he'd ever read. Chapter 3. Calls in the Night. It took an hour of frantic searching before Will emerge from the secret vault. He had scoured ledgers, diaries, and archival documents, gleaning fragments about the pendant of Ashkur. It was rumored to be of Middle Eastern origin, tied to an ancient society that believed the pendant channeled spiritual energy for healing in virtuous hands or unimaginable destruction in hands corrupted by ambition. No one truly understood its mechanism, but legends were unanimous about its potency. Exiting the subterranean chamber, he wondered if the intruder had left the mansion altogether. The corridor upstairs was silent, the dust undisturbed. Outside, twilight had given way to the deeper hush of night. A single lamp in the foyer flickered, though he had not recalled turning it on. Warily, he stepped into the front hall, longing for fresh air and the vantage the open courtyard might provide. The main door was still locked, though the chain had been undone when he first arrived. He unlatched it, stepping into the crisp Vermont night. The courtyard was empty, an eerie calm stretching across the estate. The intruder was gone, presumably carrying the pendant to wherever his nefarious intentions led him. Will's SUV was still parked by the gate. Relief flooded him that the vehicle was intact. He needed to decide the next move. Alert authorities? But how to explain the mansion's secret trove and a stolen mystical relic without sounding deranged? Instead, he called Jada, voice tight with urgency. She answered groggily. Time zones had rendered it quite late in Los Angeles. "Jada," he said, forcing composure, "I need help. I'm at the Woodvale estate. I found something big, some kind of artifact. Someone stole it. They might be dangerous." He recounted the broad strokes: the mansion, the vault, the intruder who recognized him. She listened in disbelief, but sensed the gravity in his tone. "Do you want me to call the police or a private security firm? Maybe we can talk to local historians?" He paused. Police might just confiscate everything and bury it in red tape. Or worse, not believe a word. This is a century-old estate that nobody's claimed in decades. And the relic is apparently more than an antique. We might need a specialist. Maybe a historian who's used to dealing with unusual artifacts. Jada promised to make inquiries discreetly. Before hanging up, she insisted he find a safe place to stay, rather than sleeping in the haunted mansion. Reluctantly, Will agreed. The exhaustion and tension pressed on him. He grabbed a few essential documents from the vault, notes on the pendant's history, some photos, and locked the mansion behind him. He found a small inn in a nearby town. The innkeeper, a kindly older man named Horace, welcomed the unexpected guest politely, not recognizing Will in the dim lamplight. Or, if he did, he made no mention. Will collapsed onto the bed in a modest room with floral wallpaper and an antique lamp. Sleep came fitfully. Dreams tormented him with visions of the stolen pendant gleaming in darkness, whispered incantations swirling around him. He awoke before dawn, a sense of urgency pulsing in his veins. Checking his phone, he saw a text from Jada, instructing him to meet a local historian named Professor Ingrid Whitlock. She specialized in archaic lore and was known for her quiet consultancy with museums and private collectors. The text included a phone number. Grateful for Jada's quick work, he dialed it immediately. A cool, measured voice answered. Professor Whitlock speaking. Professor, hi. Will started, carefully omitting details about his identity for the moment. I have an urgent matter regarding a certain antique of possible Middle Eastern origin. It's tied to the Woodvale family's estate. An audible pause. Who are you? She asked, suspicious. And how did you get my number? He recognized the need for candor, so he explained enough to convey the seriousness without mentioning the stolen items' more supernatural rumors. I'm staying near the Woodvale estate. Found references to an artifact called the Pendant of Ashkur. Something happened. I can't explain it all over the phone, but I need guidance. Another pause. Then, quietly, she said, meet me at the Tannenfield University Library at noon. We'll talk in my office. This conversation doesn't leave that room, understood? Will agreed. The call ended with the professor promising to arrange a private entrance so they wouldn't attract attention. He checked the time. Barely 6 a.m. enough hours to gather himself and revisit the estate briefly, if necessary. He left the inn, heart hammering with a sense of being in uncharted waters. This was no typical puzzle. Every moment that passed allowed the unknown intruder to get further away. The property gate stood as he had left it, the chain coiled on the ground. Guilt nagged him about the uncovered trove in the basement vault. Perhaps he should secure the house better or hide what was left. But time was limited. Stepping through the mansion again, he realized how eerie it felt in the early morning gloom. Shafts of dawnlight pierced the dusty windows, revealing drifting motes. The hush pressed in, as if the house lay in silent mourning for the stolen relic. He revisited the library, ensuring the hidden stair door was locked from within. Then he replaced the chain from the outside, setting a new combination lock that he purchased at a nearby hardware store. It wasn't foolproof, but hopefully it would deter random intruders. By mid-morning, he drove an hour south to Tannenfield University. The campus bustled with students, an odd contrast to the silent mansion's gloom. He wore a baseball cap and sunglasses to keep a low profile, though a few passers-by did double takes. He reached the library as instructed, a grand building of brick and pillars. Taking a side entrance, he found a narrow corridor leading to a small wooden door labeled with a brass plaque, Dr. Ingrid Whitlock, Department of Antiquities. He knocked lightly. A moment later, the door opened, revealing a woman in her late 30s with sharp eyes and a composed demeanor. She wore a tailored blazer over a simple blouse, her dark hair pulled into a bun. She sized him up, noting the tension in his posture. Mr. Smith, I presume, she asked in a no-nonsense tone, stepping aside to let him enter. He nodded, removing the cap. The office was cramped but orderly, shelves crammed with tomes, fragments of pottery, and cryptic diagrams pinned to a corkboard. A single window overlooked a courtyard. She closed the door behind them, motioning for him to take a seat. I rarely do this, she began, settling at her desk. I'm not a detective or law enforcement, but your friend was persistent. She said you uncovered something of unusual significance. Without preamble, Will laid out a handful of documents from a vault. Ingrid's eyes widened at the ledger pages referencing the pendant of Ushkur. Her skepticism melted into fascination. She examined the sketches and scribbled notes, occasionally muttering about ancient legends. He recounted the theft by the unknown man, the mention of a prophecy. Ingrid's expression grew grim. This artifact, if it's what I suspect, is indeed extremely rare, she said softly. Stories about it trace back to a sect that believed in bridging two realms, one of matter, one of spirit. They revered the pendant as a conduit. Some accounts suggest it can amplify a person's innermost intentions. For a benevolent soul, it might bring healing or unity. For a malevolent soul, it becomes a tool of destruction. Legend, of course, but sometimes legends have a core of truth. Her words mirrored the ominous notes in Woodvale's ledger. Will's worry increased. Then the man who stole it. If his intentions are dark, we have a serious problem. Ingrid tapped a foot anxiously. I suspect he's not acting alone. There have been rumors in certain circles about a group collecting relics for some clandestine purpose. The pendant of Ushkur would be a jewel in their crown. He nodded, remembering the intruder's confidence. What can we do? We can't exactly put out an all-points bulletin for a possibly magical item. She opened a drawer, retrieving a slender notebook. We could try to track known associates or past sightings of this item. Meanwhile, we might glean how to neutralize or reclaim it. The old texts mention a counterpart, an object or symbol that can seal or guide the pendant's power. We should check Woodvale's archives for more clues. Will's phone vibrated, displaying an unknown caller. Concerned it might be the intruder or some lead, he excused himself to answer. A distorted voice crackled on the line. You meddle in forces beyond your comprehension. Turn back, Mr. Smith, or face consequences. The pendant is not yours to reclaim. Shaken, Will ended the call. Ingrid observed his reaction, eyes narrowed. Threatening you, are they? He explained, breath unsteady, yes. Seems word spreads fast. She pursed her lips. They were definitely onto something. The pendant's theft is part of a bigger plot. As the old grandfather clock in her office chimed the noon hour, Will realized the turning point had arrived. He was no longer an onlooker. By stepping onto this path, by daring to investigate the mansion and the relic, he had entered a hidden world of secrets, powerful artifacts, and shadowy figures. An unexplainable phenomenon now entwined with his life. Let's do it, he said softly. We have to find the pendant of Ushkur before they use it. The question is how. Ingrid closed her notebook with a decisive snap. We start with the Woodvale Estate's deeper records. The best chance of containing that relic lies in knowledge lost to time. If you're ready to face what may come, I'll help you. A swirl of determination, fear, and hope coursed through Will. He thought of how bizarre the last 24 hours had been. Yet, beyond all logic, he felt an undercurrent of purpose. He extended his hand to Ingrid. I'm in. Let's go find our answers. Their handshake sealed the alliance. Outside, the campus hum continued, students oblivious to the quiet battle forming around them. Inside, Will sensed the hush of that haunted mansion stirring anew in his mind, as though urging him to return with fresh insight. He left the library with Ingrid by his side, the weight of an ancient prophecy pressing upon him. Chapter 4. Pieces of the puzzle by late afternoon. Will Smith and Professor Ingrid Whitlock sat in the snug interior of his SUV, parked discreetly near the Woodvale Estate's gate. The chain lock Will had installed earlier remained undisturbed, a small relief. Ingrid peered through the windshield at the mansion's silhouette beyond the overgrown grounds. It has an aura, doesn't it? She murmured. Architecture aside, there's a distinct energy about this place. Will nodded, recalling the hush he felt from the moment he stepped on the property. It's like it's been waiting for someone to uncover its secrets. They left the vehicle, Ingrid carrying a satchel filled with reference books and a laptop. She wore hiking boots and a worn leather jacket, prepared for dust and darkness. Will opened the chain, and they followed the leaf-littered path to the front door. Ingrid glanced at the corroded door handle, the battered windows. Looks like nobody's been here for a century, aside from your visit. He led her through the foyer, flicking on a flashlight. The waning daylight cast deep shadows across the corridors. Leading her upstairs to the library, he showed her the secret door behind the desk, explaining how it matched the disc on his keyring. Ingrid's eyes lit up at the hidden mechanism. She traced the carved symbol on the door with her fingertip. This shape's reminiscent of certain Mesopotamian cuneiform designs, though adapted. Possibly the Woodvales traveled widely, where they employed scholars who merged cultural motifs. Down the spiral steps they went, entering the subterranean chamber. Ingrid inhaled sharply at the sight of the vast collection. The haphazard arrangement of crates, artifacts, and aged documents enthralled her. This might be the biggest private stash of historical relics I've ever seen, she whispered. And to think it's been hidden away. Will recounted how he had encountered the intruder there. They proceeded carefully, searching for any sign of forced entry. Indeed, footprints marred the dusty floor, footprints leading to where the pendant had been stored. The trunk from which the intruder had taken it lay open. Ingrid spent several minutes examining the area, but found no immediate clue to the thief's identity. They organized a makeshift workstation atop a large crate, setting up Ingrid's laptop and some reference volumes. We'll retrieve diaries and ledgers from a shelf near the back, placing them carefully. Ingrid booted up her laptop, intending to cross-check any new findings with digital archives she had partial access to. Her fingers flew over the keys. If I can confirm the pendant's genealogical line, who possessed it, who wrote about it, we might glean how it's used or where it's been seen recently. The fewer surprises, the better. Hours passed in laborious research. They deciphered handwritten notes from Edgar Woodvale, referencing an expedition to the Middle East in the 1890s, led by a certain Colonel Harrington. One entry stood out. December 7th, 1892. Harrington returned with the pendant of Ushkur, as rumored. Nightmares plague his men once they found it. Some claim it glows at midnight, whispering in unknown tongues. Harrington insisted we keep it locked away, sealed with wards from an ancient ritual. I remain watchful, for I sense a darkness coiling around the artifact. Wards from an ancient ritual, Ingrid mused. That might be crucial. If there's a method to contain or neutralize the pendant, it could be tied to these wards. They found sketches of arcane symbols, possibly instructions for a protective seal. Some pages were too worn to decipher. Ingrid groaned in frustration. If only I had a better reference for these glyphs. At times, Will's phone buzzed, messages from Jada asking for updates, but he mostly ignored them, too focused on the labyrinthine texts. As the evening deepened, Ingrid discovered a short note folded between ledger pages. To Edgar, your letter about the pendant of Ushkur concerns me. I've heard whispered legends across Cairo's old bazaars that it can unravel the boundary between realms. One caretaker in a hidden library spoke of a counterbalanced talisman known to quell the pendant's harmful potential. Seek the talisman in conjunction with your wards, or your family may pay a dire price. See, Harrington and hush fell between them. So there was a second relic, a counterbalanced talisman. If the intruder had only the pendant, perhaps the talisman could tip the scales. Ingrid's excitement flared. That must be our next lead. Maybe the Woodvales acquired or safeguarded it somewhere else on the estate. They scoured the crates with renewed purpose, sifting through dusty labels and rummaging in battered trunks. One trunk contained old currency, letters from African explorers, and a locked metal box with no key. Another held trinkets from Asia, porcelain figurines carefully wrapped. No mention of a talisman. Finally, Ingrid discovered a sealed wooden crate labeled Talisman 1905. She brushed away cobwebs and pried it open with a crowbar. Inside, only crumpled cloth and an empty bracket where something once rested. Disappointment crashed upon them. No talisman. Was it taken by an earlier generation or stolen by the same intruder? However, a note lay crumpled at the bottom. We've moved the item known as the talisman to Stonebridge Abbey for safekeeping. None must know, for if the two objects unite under ill intent, the world may tremble. Ingrid's brow furrowed. Stonebridge Abbey, where is that? The name suggests British ancestry, or maybe a location in New England that borrowed European names. We'll type Stonebridge Abbey into a search engine on Ingrid's laptop, but results were scant. A few references to an old monastic property in upstate New York, once known as Stonebridge Priory. Could that be it? Another site suggested a Stonebridge Abbey in rural England. The lead was fuzzy. Amid the search, the overhead lights flickered. A faint scraping noise echoed from the distant corner of the vault. Both froze. Memories of the intruder's presence returned to Will's mind. Ingrid shut off the laptop screen light, and they crept through the aisles of crates, hearts pounding. The scraping continued, akin to nails or a subtle movement behind a row of stacked crates. Will raised his flashlight, shining it into the gloom. Nothing moved, but the eerie sense of not being alone crawled up their spines. Could be an animal, Ingrid whispered, though her expression suggested she doubted it. Or the building settling. They ventured deeper, eventually discovering a collapsed portion of stone wall behind rotting crates. Possibly the source of the noise, masonry giving way. Ingrid exhaled in relief, though both remained on edge. The mood here was oppressive, as if the entire space pulsed with anxiety since the pendant was taken. Returning to their workstation, they decided they had gleaned enough for one night. The next step was to identify the correct Stonebridge Abbey and see if the talisman was still hidden there. If so, that might be their only hope of neutralizing the pendant. Before leaving, they locked up as best they could, ensuring no more artifacts vanished. As they ascended to the mansion's main floor, Ingrid paused at a cracked mirror in the hallway. Her reflection flickered in the dull moonlight. She glanced at Will, a question in her eyes. "Are you prepared for what this might demand of you, Mr. Smith? We're dealing with forces beyond typical academic pursuits." He gave a grim nod. "I wasn't looking for this, but now I'm in. If there's a chance to prevent something terrible, I have to try." She mustered a faint smile of solidarity. Together, they stepped out into the night, hearts weighed by the knowledge that if the talisman lay half a continent or an ocean away, time was slipping through their fingers. The unnamed thief could be forging alliances, harnessing the pendant's latent power. And the only clue they possessed was a cryptic mention of Stonebridge Abbey and a handful of partial instructions for the wards. Chapter 5. Clues across the SEA morning light found Will and Ingrid in a local coffee shop. Laptops open, half-drained mugs beside them. Dark circles under their eyes betrayed the late night spent poring over old texts. The hushed chatter of patrons and the soothing aroma of roasted beans offered a brief comfort, but their minds stayed fixed on the urgent puzzle at hand. Ingrid typed rapidly, scanning obscure historical registries, genealogical records, and property archives. "There's a Stonebridge Abbey in Suffolk, England," she said, chewing on her lower lip. "Dates back to the 14th century. Fell into disrepair after the dissolution of monasteries. Then a private family renovated it in the 19th century. Could that be it?" Will recalled how wealthy families often had transatlantic ties. Possible. The Woodvales could have owned or leased property in England. Or they allied with the family that restored the abbey. They cross-referenced shipping logs from the early 1900s, attempting to trace where Woodvale might have sent the talisman. A short mention in a maritime ledger popped up. Crate from Woodvale Estate, Vermont, to Stonebridge Abbey, Suffolk, 1905. That was it. Their hearts leapt. "That must be the shipment," Ingrid breathed. So the talisman was indeed transported to England. If it remained there, it might be locked away in some hidden corner. Will glanced out the cafe window, mulling the implications. "We need to go to Suffolk, find this abbey, and see if we can locate the talisman. That is, if it's still there." Ingrid concurred. She placed a call to a British colleague, Dr. Harriet Mills, an archivist specializing in aristocratic estates. Harriet answered with warm surprise, agreeing to help discreetly. Ingrid provided the Stonebridge Abbey lead, and Harriet promised to gather deeds, estate documents, and any local lore about hidden relics. The less official involvement, the better, they agreed. The last thing they wanted was a public hullabaloo drawing attention to a potentially dangerous artifact. 2 hours later, Harriet emailed partial scans of old property documents. Among them was a floor plan of Stonebridge Abbey from 1920, annotated with cryptic notes referencing sealed chapels, hidden crypts, and walled-off corridors. A footnote indicated that in the early 20th century, certain renovations were performed by a reclusive benefactor from America. Another arrow pointed to a storeroom labeled Curios from overseas. That must be where the talisman might be stored, Ingrid said, excitement mingling with dread. Will's phone chimed, a text from Jada. She had managed to charter a flight to London that evening, if needed. The speed of his life still amazed him. From a random key arriving in the mail to preparing an international trip in less than 48 hours. They decided quickly. Ingrid would gather all the relevant documents, Will would handle logistics, and they'd fly to England. The possibility of colliding with the thief's network loomed large. If the enemy discovered the talisman was sought after, they might intercept or sabotage it. Time was of the essence. By late afternoon, they were en route to the airport, an uneasy hush in the SUV. The New England scenery blurred past the windows, overshadowed by the quest waiting across the Atlantic. Ingrid tapped her foot anxiously, reviewing a stack of printouts. Will's mind flicked back to the stolen pendant of Ashkur, imagining it in the hands of that cold-eyed intruder. Each mile closer to the airport was another step toward a confrontation they had never wanted but now must face. Their flight from Boston to London was mercifully uneventful. Seated in business class, courtesy of Will's resources, they attempted to rest. Ingrid pored over digital references while Will tried to glean a few hours of sleep, haunted by dreams of shadowy corridors and chanting voices. Each jolt of turbulence felt like a warning from the universe. They landed at Heathrow at dawn local time. Dr. Harriet Mills had arranged a rental car for them, along with a discreet accommodation near the Suffolk countryside. Ingrid texted Harriet their arrival, receiving instructions to meet at a small tea room in a quaint village not far from the Abbey. The drive out of London was a swirl of busy highways and rolling farmland. Eventually, they reached the quiet lanes of Suffolk, lined by hedgerows and fields dotted with sheep. The calm rural setting contrasted sharply with the tension in their hearts. Around midday, they pulled up to a centuries-old building with a thatched roof, a tea room that looked straight out of a postcard. Harriet Mills waited at a corner table, a slender woman in her 50s, wearing reading glasses perched on her nose. She greeted Ingrid with a warm hug, then turned to Will. If she recognized him as a film star, she politely made no mention. "Welcome," Harriet said in a hushed tone, gesturing them to sit. "I found something intriguing. The current owners of Stonebridge Abbey are an old family, rarely in residence. The place is mostly run by caretakers, occasionally open for tours to small groups. But certain wings remain off-limits, rumored to be structurally unsound. I suspect that's where you should search." Ingrid sipped her tea. "Do they keep records of these private rooms?" Harriet shook her head. "Barely. They're protective. Gentry secrecy. But I have an acquaintance among the staff. She might slip us inside after hours, provided we keep things discreet." She handed Will a photocopied page from a local history text, referencing the American shipments in 1905. There's no direct mention of a talisman, only talk of exotic curios sealed in the Abbey subcrypt. That lines up with your story. Will's phone vibrated. The caller ID showed no number. Heart sinking, he answered. The same distorted voice as before snarled. "You're persistent, Mr. Smith. We know you're in England. Turn back or face regret. The pendant is not for you to meddle with. We have watchers everywhere." The call ended abruptly. Harriet and Ingrid traded concerned glances. The enemy had eyes on them even now. Harriet spoke quietly. "That means time is short. If you can't do it tonight, you might never get the chance." They quickly hatched a plan. Harriet's staff contact could let them into Stonebridge Abbey at midnight, when no visitors or owners were around. Under cover of darkness, they'd access the hidden storeroom or subcrypt. If the talisman was there, they'd retrieve it. If not, at least they'd confirm or deny the final lead. A risky infiltration, but they saw no alternative. As dusk settled over the Suffolk countryside, they drove out to the abbey's vicinity. Harriet parted ways, cautioning them to remain inconspicuous. She'd meet them near the caretaker's cottage at the agreed hour. Will and Ingrid found a small bed and breakfast in the next village, sharing a tense meal and trying to quell their nerves. The hostess commented on them seeming like a lovely couple, which they politely deflected. A fleeting moment of normalcy in an otherwise surreal quest. That evening, they changed into practical, dark attire, something that wouldn't stand out in the gloom. Ingrid double-checked her small bag of tools: flashlight, gloves, a digital camera to document findings, a notebook, and a small device for scanning hidden compartments. Will felt the adrenaline building. He recalled the final scene of many an action film, only this was real life. There would be no second takes, no guaranteed safety. Shortly before midnight, they met Harriet near a narrow lane behind the abbey grounds. She introduced them to Clarissa, a middle-aged caretaker wearing a thick coat. Clarissa was clearly uneasy about letting strangers in, but Harriet had convinced her that they were historical researchers with urgent business. They slipped across a gravel path to an old servant's entrance, out of sight from the main gate. Inside, Stonebridge Abbey smelled of centuries-old stone and faint dampness. Corridors lit by sparse wall lamps led them deeper. Clarissa whispered, "The closed-off wing is that way, down some old steps. But be careful, the floors can be precarious." She retreated, leaving them to navigate alone. Harriet insisted she remain behind, in case of any patrol or questioning. Ingrid and Will advanced. The architecture impressed Will: lofty ceilings with archways, tapestries along the walls, tall windows overlooking dark gardens. As they ventured into the restricted wing, dust thickened. They passed a sign reading, "Danger, structural instability," ignoring the caution. The gloom heightened every footstep. Occasionally, a floorboard creaked ominously. Eventually, they found a locked wooden door bearing a carved crest reminiscent of the imagery they'd seen at the Woodvale estate. Ingrid tried a series of skeleton keys until one turned. The door groaned open, revealing a corridor lined with narrow slits for windows, leading to a heavy iron gate at the end. From behind that gate, a stale draft emerged, carrying the tang of old stone and perhaps something older. They approached the gate. It bore a rusted padlock, etched with a symbol Ingrid recognized from the diaries. She took a breath, rummaging in her bag. "This might be it," she whispered, fishing out a small crowbar. Will help pry the padlock, wincing at every squeal of metal. The padlock finally gave way. They swung the gate open. A steep stairwell descended into the bowels of the abbey. The echo of dripping water reverberated from below. A sense of stepping out of time enveloped them, as though crossing into a centuries-old secret. Ingrid turned on her flashlight, guiding the way. Each step downward felt heavier, the air chilling with each pace. Reaching the bottom, they found themselves in a cramped crypt or storage cellar. Rows of stone coffins lined one wall. Shelves of archaic volumes lined another. A battered wooden trunk sat near the center, its surface emblazoned with an old shipping label that read, "From Woodvale Estate, 1905. Their hearts pounded. Gently, they pried open the trunk's lid. Inside lay a cluster of carefully wrapped parcels, age-stained. The topmost bundle was empty. Someone had removed its contents. Beneath that, smaller items remained. Ingrid unwrapped a bundle to reveal a tarnished metal stand shaped like a half-sphere. Another containing a handful of ancient coins. Neither was the talisman. Suddenly, a strange glow caught Will's eye. At the trunk's bottom was a piece of cloth that shimmered faintly in the flashlight beam. Lifting it revealed an amulet, a dull stone set in a silver lattice. Its shape reminded him of the sketches from the diaries referencing a counterbalanced talisman. Carefully picking it up, he felt a faint warmth pulsing through the metal. Ingrid gasped in awe. "We found it," she breathed, voice trembling. This must be the talisman. An undercurrent of relief washed over Will. If this was indeed the counterbalance, they had a chance to neutralize the pendant's evil. But as he gazed at it, An inexplicable weight pressed on his psyche. He sensed the object's gravity, as though it were more than lifeless stone. They carefully sealed it in a protective pouch Ingrid brought. With renewed urgency, they prepared to leave, mindful that the intruder's allies or other watchers might soon discover them. No sooner had they turned to ascend the stairs than the gate above them clanged shut. A figure loomed at the top, silhouetted by torchlight. The man's voice echoed in the crypt. "I'll be taking that talisman, if you please." We'll recognize the accent, the cold calm. The intruder from Vermont. Chapter 6. A midnight standoff. Ingrid's flashlight quivered, illuminating the silhouette at the top of the stairs. The intruder stepped closer, revealing the same sharp features and cold eyes Will had seen in the mansion's basement vault. Behind him stood two others, both dressed in dark coats, menacing expressions etched on their faces. "So persistent, Mr. Smith," the intruder drawled. "And I see you've enlisted help from Scholar. How quaint." Will tightened his grip on the talisman's pouch. Ingrid, eyes fierce, pressed behind him, the amulet hidden from view. The crypt's stale air closed around them, the flickering torchlight casting twisted shadows on the stone walls. "What do you want?" Will demanded, forcing his voice to remain steady. The intruder sneered. "Isn't it obvious? I want the talisman you just uncovered. Alongside the pendant of Ushkur, it will complete the synergy we've long sought. You see, we are not petty thieves. We're procuring items for a grand design." Ingrid bristled at the mention of synergy. The pendant is already potent. With the talisman, you risk unleashing something catastrophic if your intentions are dark. The man laughed, a hollow sound. "Catastrophe or renewal, perspective matters. Our order has studied these relics for decades, overshadowed by secrecy. We've concluded that uniting them can reshape boundaries of reality. Why let dusty guardians like you hamper progress?" His accomplices grunted in agreement. Tension coiled in the air. Will glanced behind them, noting no alternate exit. The crypt's only staircase was blocked by hostile figures. If they handed over the talisman, they might allow them to leave, though that seemed unlikely. If they refused, a confrontation was inevitable. Ingrid slipped a small metal cylinder into Will's hand behind her back, a canister of pepper spray she'd packed for emergencies. He gave a fractional nod, heart pounding. "You can't control what you awaken," he warned. "History shows misuse leads to devastation." The intruder's lips curled. "Spare me the moralizing. If you prefer to keep it, that's your choice, but you'll do so over your own bodies. Gentlemen, retrieve the item." His henchmen advanced down the stone steps, unsheathing short blades from within their coats. Ingrid's eyes widened, and Will felt adrenaline spike. They had no illusions that they were fighters skilled enough for a standoff with multiple armed men in a cramped crypt. Still, they couldn't let the talisman fall into those hands. The first henchman lunged. Will raised the pepper spray, unleashing a blast into his face. The man recoiled, screaming, clawing at his eyes. Ingrid ducked behind Will, gripping the talisman. The second henchman snarled and dashed forward. Will blocked hastily, catching a slash along his forearm that tore his jacket but spared serious injury. He pivoted, delivering a punch to the man's jaw. Ingrid stumbled backward, nearly dropping the talisman. The intruder at the top of the stairs cursed. "Imbeciles," he spat, stepping forward himself, brandishing a slender dagger. Will's heart thundered. This was no choreographed film scene. One misstep could be fatal. The pepper-sprayed henchman staggered around blindly, while the second shook off the blow and raised his blade again. The confined crypt offered little room to maneuver. In the flickering torchlight, Ingrid spotted a heavy candlestick on a small stone altar. Grabbing it, she hurled it at the second henchman. It struck his shoulder with a dull thud, sending him off balance. Will followed up by kicking the man's shin, toppling him to the floor. The man groaned, blade clattering away. Yet the intruder was upon them, dagger glinting. "Enough of this," he hissed, slashing dangerously close to Will's face. Will ducked, the blade nicking his cheek. Pain flared. Ingrid cried out. Blood trickled warm down Will's chin, but adrenaline surged. He elbowed the intruder's arm, deflecting the next strike. Somehow, in the chaos, Ingrid managed to slip around the assailants, the talisman tucked in her pouch. She motioned at will, eyes wide, and pointed to the staircase. They had to break through. The second henchman scrambled to stand, reaching for his knife. The first reeled blindly, still incapacitated by the spray. With a burst of desperation, Will feigned a lunge at the intruder, causing him to step back. Ingrid dashed up the stairs, Will hot on her heels. The intruder roared, "Stop them!" but Will swung a savage backhand at the second henchman, toppling him again. Blood pounded in his ears as they scrambled up, stumbling across the threshold into the corridor. They slammed the iron gate behind them, but it lacked a functioning lock from this side. The intruder was sure to follow. Ingrid spotted a thick wooden beam leaning against the wall, perhaps from a collapsed scaffolding. Together, they wedged it across the gate, creating a makeshift barrier. Shouts and pounding erupted from below as the men tried forcing the gate open. Breath ragged, they fled the restricted wing, navigating by the faint glow of wall lamps. Stonebridge Abbey's corridors twisted like a labyrinth. They had to find Clarissa's exit. If they guessed incorrectly, they might end up cornered. The mansion's hush turned ominous, each echo of footsteps reminding them of the pursuers close behind. They emerged into a candlelit hallway lined with paintings of solemn abbots and medieval knights. A side corridor led to the servants' entrance. Harriet and Clarissa were nowhere in sight, possibly waiting at the caretaker's cottage. The door they'd used was ahead, a sturdy oak panel lock from the inside. Ingrid fumbled with the bolt, hands shaking. Behind them, frantic footsteps echoed. The intruder and at least one henchman had forced the gate, evidently faster than expected. The door swung open at last, letting in a rush of cool night air. They slipped out into the yard. Dim moonlight revealed a wide gravel path behind the abbey. In the distance, they heard voices shouting. Shadows flickered across the windows. The intruders' group might have spread out, searching the estate. Moving with hushed urgency, they skirted a row of overgrown hedges, guided by Harriet's earlier directions. A faint glow shone from a caretaker's cottage near the boundary wall. Ingrid clutched the talisman pouch to her chest, as if it might vanish otherwise. The adrenaline refused to fade, every nerve on edge. At the cottage's back door, Harriet stood with Clarissa, both anxious. Harriet gasped at the sight of Will's bloody cheek and torn jacket. "What happened? Are you hurt?" Ingrid exhaled. "We were ambushed. We got the talisman, but they're chasing us. We need to leave now." Clarissa's eyes widened in alarm. She hurried them into the cottage's modest kitchen. Harriet peered outside, seeing figures with flashlights combing the abbey grounds. "We can slip out the other side, to your car on the lane. Hurry." Minutes later, they emerged behind the cottage, crossing a narrow orchard to reach the gravel lane. Will's heart hammered. His arms ached, and the cut on his cheek stung painfully. Ingrid looked equally shaken but resolute. Harriet guided them to where their rental car was tucked among hedgerow shadows. No sign of the pursuers, though distant beams danced near the abbey's front drive. They piled into the car, Harriet at the wheel. The engine purred to life. She flicked off the headlights, creeping down the lane with only the faint moonlight to guide them until they were safely out of earshot. Once sure they weren't followed, Harriet switched on the lights, accelerating away from Stonebridge Abbey. In the back seat, Ingrid pressed gauze to Will's cheek, concern etched in her face. "We're safe for now, but they won't stop. We have the talisman they need." Will winced, forcing a half-smile. "I'd say that's a success, then." Harriet glanced in the rearview mirror. "We can hide you at my cottage in a nearby village. They'll likely search hotels, B and BS. It won't be comfortable, but it's safer." They nodded gratefully. Before them, the moonlit Suffolk countryside stretched silent, ancient fields and hedgerows gliding by. Relief and dread mingled. Relief at escaping, dread at the next step. The talisman was theirs now, but only half of the puzzle. The pendant was still with those who sought to misuse it. If they combined the two, an unknown horror might unfold. The journey was far from over. Will leaned his head against the seat, shutting his eyes briefly. The hush of the English night lulled him, but a flicker of determination sparked behind his weariness. He would not allow these adversaries to claim victory. One stolen relic had already threatened an unimaginable outcome. Thanks to Ingrid, Harriet, and the dusty diaries, they had a fighting chance to stand against it. "How do we neutralize the pendant?" he asked softly, opening his eyes to meet Ingrid's gaze. "We can't just keep the talisman hidden forever." Her expression was grim, yet resolved. "We'll need to find the right ritual." The wards Woodvale wrote about the synergy mentioned in the diaries. "If we do it correctly, we might break the pendant's hold or prevent it from causing devastation. But we'll need to confront them eventually." We'll exhale the shaky breath. "Then let's figure out how, because we're running out of places to hide." And they won't give up. Outside, the lane curved under a canopy of ancient oaks. The darkness beyond the car windows felt alive with secrets, and the old legends seemed closer than ever. Some battles, Will realized, were chosen for you. He had never expected this, but neither would he shrink from it. The talisman's faint warmth radiated through the pouch in Ingrid's hands. A beacon, a burden, and perhaps their only hope. Chapter 7. Guardian's Secrets. Harriet's cottage turned out to be a modest, ivy-clad dwelling near a small creek, flanked by tall birch trees. It was a perfect hideaway, surrounded by fields and away from main roads. She ushered Will, Ingrid, and Clarissa inside. They secured the door, drawing curtains across the windows. Outside, dawn approached once again, the horizon tinged with a pale hue of pink and gold. Exhaustion weighed on them, but adrenaline still coursed. Harriet brewed tea, while Ingrid carefully cleaned and bandaged the cut on Will's cheek. He winced at the antiseptic sting, but the wound was superficial. Clarissa hovered nervously, apologizing repeatedly for her inability to stop the intruders at the Abbey. Will and Ingrid reassured her it wasn't her fault. Once they settled in the snug living room, Harriet lit a small fire in the hearth. The group formed a circle, the talisman resting on a cloth in the center. Warm lamplight played over the amulet's dull stone, giving it an unearthly sheen. Ingrid recounted what they'd pieced together. The pendant of Ushcore stolen from the Woodvale vault, the talisman discovered in Stonebridge Abbey's crypt, and the looming threat of uniting both relics. Harriet listened intently, shaking her head in disbelief. Though an accomplished archivist, she had never dealt with artifacts rumored to hold mystical energies. Yet the diaries are consistent, Ingrid concluded, flipping through notes. They mention wards, rituals, synergy. The relics are keys to something deeper. If those men unify them under dark intent, who knows what might occur? Will stared into the flickering flames, voice subdued. "So we have the talisman, but we can't do anything unless we also have the pendant. And we have no idea where the thief took it or who he's working for." Clarissa cleared her throat. "Could we lure them somehow? If they want the talisman so badly, perhaps we can set terms for an exchange, then seize the pendant?" Harriet frowned. "That's risky. They'd likely come armed and in greater numbers. And we still don't know how to safely handle the relics together." Ingrid tapped the talisman with a pen tip, careful not to touch it directly. According to Woodvale's notes, the wards involve a specific incantation or arrangement of symbols. He believed it came from a Middle Eastern text that Harrington discovered. If we replicate that ceremony, we might negate the relic's malignant capabilities. But we need both relics in one place, precisely timed, or it won't work. Will's mind raced, recalling how the diaries mentioned an initiate's mark, that disc key he'd originally received. He rummaged in his jacket pocket, producing the disc. Could this be part of the puzzle? It matched the library door. But maybe it's more, like a piece of the ritual. Ingrid studied it closely, eyes narrowing. "You might be onto something. Notice these lines. They match cuneiform or Proto-Arabic forms. Possibly the recitation must be triggered by this symbol, or it's a physical token that resonates with the relic's energy. Then we need to bring them together," Harriet summarized. "But how do we find the pendant's location or the group behind the theft?" Clarissa sipped her tea nervously. "Could they still be in England? Or maybe they'll return to Vermont. They threatened you, so they must be tracking your movements. Maybe it's best to vanish entirely and lure them out on your terms. A hush followed. The plan felt precarious, but no better strategy emerged. Ingrid rummaged through her bag, producing the diaries from Woodvale once more. She flipped to a dog-eared page referencing a final note about meeting under the blood moon, apparently a condition for the relic's ultimate function. Perhaps the thieves intended to wait for a specific lunar alignment or other cosmic event. That might give us time, Ingrid noted. The next total lunar eclipse is in a few weeks. If the group follows this lore, they might gather then, unless they have an alternate plan. Will exhaled, shoulders sagging. I just want to ensure they can't do harm. If we can figure out how to use the talisman to neutralize the pendant, we might not even need to physically seize it. We could sabotage its power from afar. But the diaries suggest they must be physically close. Harry apologized for having so few answers. She offered them rest, urging them to get some sleep. They took turns napping on couches or in the spare bedroom. A few hours' rest was all they could afford before they resumed research. Danger still loomed, and they feared every passing minute gave the thieves time to strengthen their hold on the pendant. In the midday calm, Ingrid made a series of phone calls to colleagues around the globe. An archaeology professor in Cairo confirmed the existence of a rumored text describing the ritual of parting, believed to sever two artifacts' shared bond. Another researcher in Istanbul claimed knowledge of a hidden library where fragments of Harrington's expedition diaries might remain. Yet no single source had the entire puzzle. Harriet suggested a decentralized approach. You might have to gather partial translations from multiple sources. Combine them quickly. Meanwhile, we keep our locations secret. If your phone is compromised, they'll trace you, so use code names and secure lines. Keep the talisman hidden. Clarissa volunteered to stand guard or run errands, acknowledging she felt responsible for letting them into Stonebridge Abbey. Will appreciated her bravery, though he insisted no one risk themselves unnecessarily. The last thing he wanted was more innocents caught in the crossfire. As night approached again, the tension within the cottage thickened. Ingrid spent hours meticulously cross-checking references. Harriet paced, occasionally peering outside at the quiet lane. Would try to calm the swirling worry in his mind by reviewing the original note that started this all. The memory of receiving that cryptic package at his LA home felt ages ago. Who was the traveler who had sent the key? Possibly an ally who foresaw the threat, but left him to discover it on his own? No direct clue about that. He sighed, rummaging through the diaries once more, searching for mention of a mysterious benefactor. At last, an entry from Woodvale in 1904 caught his eye. A traveler of unknown origin delivered the initiate's mark. He said it would find its rightful bearer in time. I sense the forces guiding us transcend mortal understanding. We must ensure the mark reaches one who can stand against the pendant's corruption. A chill slid down Will's spine. So the original traveler from decades ago had entrusted this to the Woodvales, who had eventually left it for him. Did that mean he was the rightful bearer? The diaries implied a destiny, an idea that felt equally grand and terrifying. He shared the passage with Ingrid, who frowned thoughtfully. It suggests you might have a deeper role than we realized. The mansion's key only let you inside, but perhaps you're also crucial in performing the final ward. Are you open to that possibility? Will swallowed, recalling how unbelievably strange his life had become. If that's what it takes. I'm not going to pretend I understand it, but I won't run from it either. By the fireplace, Harriet quietly listened, a mixture of awe and worry on her face. This was no everyday academic puzzle. She cleared her throat. We have an advantage. The talisman is safe in our hands. That might stall their plan, but we can't be complacent. Indeed, none of them felt secure. They posted a watch at the windows, half expecting black cars or suspicious figures to prowl the lane. Evening turned into deep night. A single lamp glowed over the table where Ingrid meticulously pieced together lines of text from the diaries, referencing the talisman's activation. She read softly. When the mark and talisman converge under pure intent, the bridging shall commence, forging a shield against the Ushkur artifact's malice. One must speak the litany of parted paths. The synergy undone, darkness caged. Only thus shall the realm remain unbroken. Litany of parted paths, Ingrid repeated. We need that incantation. It's presumably recorded somewhere in Harrington's notes or a Middle Eastern text. We have fragments, but not the full script. We'll inhale the shaky breath. Then that's our next mission, to find the missing lines. The thieves must be searching for them too, or they have an alternate method to harness the relic. Either way, we must outpace them. Even as weariness gnawed, they pressed on, forging a plan to reach out to Ingrid's contact in Istanbul, maybe travel there if needed. Harriet frowned about crossing too many borders with a valuable artifact, but they saw no alternative. Time was short, the stakes immense. A hush settled in the cottage, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the occasional rustle of pages. Outside, an owl hooted, a lonely call across the fields. Will gazed at the talisman on the table, its dull stone reflecting the lamplight. He sensed something stirring in its depths, or perhaps it was just imagination born of exhaustion. Nonetheless, a flicker of resolve hardened in him. He had stepped into this labyrinth of mysteries almost by accident, yet now, with lives and possibly the fate of countless people at stake, he felt a clarity of purpose. He was no chosen hero from script, just a man with resources, a loyal circle, and a will to do right. Maybe that was enough. At dawn, Ingrid closed her laptop, eyes bloodshot from reading. She managed a weary half-smile. We have partial contact with a historian in Istanbul who claims to hold copies of Harrington's field journals. If that's real, we might get the litany soon. Harriet insisted they get some sleep. The group agreed. Just a few hours, then they'd resume. They prepared small cots in Harriet's back rooms, taking turns to ensure at least one person was awake, guarding the talisman. The hush returned, the cottage's walls providing a fragile sense of safety in a storm of ancient secrets. Before drifting into fitful slumber, Will studied the flickering shadows on the ceiling, mind echoing with the diary's lines. The bridging shall commence, forging a shield. Only thus shall the realm remain unbroken. He exhaled and closed his eyes. The talisman's uncertain power pulsed in the corner, as if acknowledging his vow. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the stolen pendant of Ushkur awaited its own destiny. Chapter 8. Pursuit of the litany. Less than 2 days later, Will Smith, Ingrid Whitlock, and Harriet Mills found themselves on a plane bound for Istanbul. In the end, Ingrid's contact insisted the Harrington journals were too delicate to ship or scan. A personal visit was the only option to confirm authenticity. Clarissa stayed behind in England, keeping watch on Harriet's cottage, in case the thieves or their associates returned. Though traveling internationally with the talisman was risky, they reasoned that leaving it behind might be worse. If the thieves discovered its location, they could seize it unguarded. Harriet accompanied them as well, determined to see this through. She used her personal connections with archives across Europe to expedite their search. The flight soared above clouds and the glimmering Mediterranean, eventually descending into the vibrant sprawl of Istanbul. Ancient minarets and modern skyscrapers coexisted in a tapestry of cultures and eras. They took a taxi to a modest boutique hotel near the Bosphorus, Ingrid marveling at the city's layered history. Will, weighed down by tension, found fleeting comfort in the new sights. After settling into adjoining rooms, they ventured to meet Ingrid's contact, a semi-retired scholar named Dr. Kemal Baruti. He had agreed to speak with him privately in his old office near the Grand Bazaar. The building was a labyrinth of corridors and dusty corners, reminiscent of an earlier age. Dr. Baruti, slender and bespectacled, welcomed them with cautious warmth. Ingrid introduced Harriet and Will, explaining they sought Harrington's field journals referencing the Ushkur relic. Baruti nodded gravely, retrieving a locked wooden chest from a cabinet. Inside lay a battered leather notebook stamped with the initials Sage 1892. He opened it carefully, the pages brittle with time. Faded writing described Harrington's expedition to unearth an artifact in a desert region. Sketches of the pendant, references to local legends, and cryptic remarks about balancing wards. Ingrid's breath caught as she recognized lines overlapping with Woodvale's diaries. Then came the crucial mention. I record here the litany of parting gleaned from my guide's ancient scroll. Should the pendant ever threaten unchecked power, the talisman must be brought forth in synergy to recite these words, thus severing the bond. Only those who carry the initiate's mark can complete it. A wave of triumph surged in them. The litany was real, recorded across a few paragraphs. Dr. Baruti carefully let Ingrid photograph each page, cautioning her about the notebook's fragility. Harriet and Will hovered, reading the shaky script. In the hour of twilight, stand with talisman aloft, recite the binding severed. Let no malice dwell. Though incomplete, it matched much of the text Ingrid had gleaned from the diaries. Putting them side by side might yield the entire formula. Will exhaled in relief. We have it. The words to break the pendant's power. Baruti, however, cleared his throat. A warning. The text states the litany only works if the talisman and pendant are physically present and the mark's bearer is pure of intent. Otherwise, the power might twist unpredictably. Be mindful, Mr. Smith. He explained that historically, this synergy was never tested. The original keepers of the relics ensured they remained locked away. Harrington's expedition was the first time the pendant surfaced in centuries, and the talisman was discovered only to contain it. Now, a modern group threatened to harness it. The old scholar gazed at Will with an almost paternal concern. If you fail, the cost could be unimaginable. Will nodded, shoulders squared. Thank you for trusting us. We'll do everything to prevent that outcome. They parted ways. Ingrid clutched her camera, which held the photographed pages of Harrington's journal. Harriet's eyes shone with relief, though overshadowed by the knowledge that obtaining the litany was just step one. The next step was more dangerous: locating the thieves, confronting them, and reciting the litany at the precise moment. A daunting confrontation loomed. Returning to their hotel, they found a message slipped under Will's door. The envelope was plain, the note inside typed. We see your arrival in Istanbul. Stop now. Bring us the talisman, or we will personally collect it. You have only so many chances to yield. The intimidation never ended. Ingrid insisted they keep the talisman on them at all times. Harriet suggested they ask Dr. Baruti if he had any idea who might be tailing them. But short of that, they had no immediate plan, only the knowledge that they were not safe, even halfway around the world. They spent the evening analyzing the litany's text line by line, cross-referencing it with Woodvale's diaries. Ingrid typed it into a single document, translating archaic phrases into a modern incantation. She discovered that the ritual demanded precise steps, forming a circle with the talisman and pendant at the center, reciting the incantation thrice as the mark's bearer held both relics. Will paled. Both relics. Meaning I have to hold that curse pendant too, the moment we do this? Ingrid nodded reluctantly. Yes, or at least they must be within your grasp. The risk is enormous if the pendant tries to influence you. But there's no other method described. Despite the fear, Will felt a flicker of acceptance. He had come this far. Harriet checked historical data about upcoming lunar phases, noting a partial eclipse in about 9 days. Possibly the thieves aimed for that window. With the litany in hand, Will and Ingrid had to intercept them before or during that event, or else the thieves' ceremony might overshadow the wards. That night, Harriet arranged a meeting with an old friend from Istanbul's law enforcement, hoping to glean any leads on suspicious foreigners seeking relics. The friend reported that a group of well-dressed individuals had inquired about local black market channels for exotic antiquities. The descriptions matched the intruder and possibly his associates. They left the city 2 days ago, heading for an unknown destination. So the thieves had already moved on. Where? If they're no longer here, we might need to chase them again, Harriet sighed. But where to? Ingrid checked her phone, eyes narrowing. Wait, I just got an email from a curator in Cairo. He recognized the pendant from old records. A man matching our intruder's description was spotted near a private airstrip, rumored to be heading to Morocco or somewhere in North Africa. Could they be returning to the artifact's original region, planning some desert ritual? A swirl of possibilities emerged. The diaries mentioned the pendant's origin in a remote region. Perhaps the thieves intended to harness the relic's energy where it was first discovered, under conditions that favored unlocking its power. If so, Will and Ingrid had to follow. Time pressed them onward. With heavy hearts, they recognized their path might lead them into the deep desert, the place where Harrington first found the pendant. Ingrid made frantic calls to see if her academic or archaeological contacts could pinpoint a specific site. Harriet started looking for flights south. Meanwhile, Will braced himself for another leap into the unknown. They reconvened in Harriet's hotel room. She spread a map across a table, pointing out possible desert areas in Morocco, Algeria, or beyond. Ingrid cross-referenced it with Harrington's notes. A single name popped up, Kader Oasis. She found a mention in Harrington's writing, "We ventured near Kader Oasis, drawn by local legends of the amulet." "This might be it," Ingrid whispered. "A remote region rarely visited, rumored to hold the shrine where the pendant was uncovered. It's possible the thieves want to replicate the original environment. Though no direct flight existed, they could get to a major city in North Africa, then charter a smaller plane or drive a treacherous route." Harriet offered to accompany them, but recognized she might hamper stealth. Ingrid and Will decided to go alone, less conspicuous. Harriet promised to keep coordinating from afar, providing updates. Before dawn, they packed up. Will carefully concealed the talisman in a hidden pouch within his luggage. Ingrid stowed her notes in multiple backups. Harriet parted from them with a worried hug at the airport. "Stay safe," she implored. "You have the litany now. Don't let them get that or the talisman." In a swirl of flight connections, Will and Ingrid found themselves crossing the Mediterranean once more, an uneasy sense of destiny guiding them to the heart of the desert. Each step left them more isolated, more reliant on their combined wits. The thieves were steps ahead, but perhaps ignorance of the litany gave Will and Ingrid an edge. If they arrived at Kader Oasis in time, maybe they could thwart the culminating ritual. As the plane descended toward a dusty runway in a small North African town, Will gazed out the window at a vast sea of sand dunes. The rising sun painted the desert in hues of orange and gold, an exquisite beauty belying the danger swirling around them. Ingrid touched his arm, and he turned to see her expression, resolve layered over fatigue and fear. "We can do this," she said softly. "We must." He nodded. The hush of the plane's cabin pressed on him, reminiscent of the hush he first felt in the Woodvale mansion, as if the entire chain of events had led to this moment. The talisman in his bag seemed to vibrate with anticipation, or perhaps it was just his imagination. Either way, there was no turning back. The desert waited, and with it, the final confrontation that would decide the relic's fate. Maybe the fate of far more. Chapter 9. Into the dunes, the small airstrip led to a modest settlement perched at the edge of the Sahara. Scorching sun, swirling dust, and the hum of commerce dominated the atmosphere. Camels, trucks, donkey carts, and modern jeeps all mingled in a chaotic tapestry. Will Smith and Ingrid Whitlock navigated the bustling market stalls, searching for their contact, a local driver recommended by Harriet's network who could take them near the Kader Oasis. They found him near a corrugated metal garage on the outskirts. A middle-aged man named Yasin, speaking broken English but exuding competence. For a steep fee, he agreed to drive them across the dunes. Ingrid quietly explained they sought an old archaeological site, though omitted details of relics or conspiracies. Yasin shrugged, used to strange foreign requests, and prepared a sturdy four-wheel drive vehicle stocked with water, extra fuel, and supplies for desert travel. By midday, they were off, leaving the settlement behind. The dusty road soon gave way to rolling dunes under a relentless sun. Heat shimmered on the horizon, painting surreal mirages. Ingrid shielded her face with a scarf, scanning an old satellite map on her phone. Will squinted behind sunglasses, the talisman nestled in his pack. The desert's vastness instilled both awe and dread. After hours of bumpy travel, Yasin cut the engine, pointing to a rocky outcrop. We rest. The next leg is deeper in. No roads, only the dune's memory. We should camp by evening. They hopped out, stretching cramped limbs. Ingrid surveyed the horizon, recalling Harrington's mention of Katar Oasis. It should be about 40 miles more. Possibly less if we find a direct route. We'll eye the scorching sun overhead. I just hope we beat those thieves. We have no guarantee they haven't arrived yet. Yasin rummaged for a canteen, and as they drank, Will's phone pinged with a text from Harriet. Heard rumors of a suspicious group chartered vehicles in the region, possibly heading your way. Be on guard. He showed it to Ingrid, who nodded grimly. It matches what we feared. With no time to waste, they resumed the journey. The sun dipped lower, gilding the dunes in golden light. Eventually, they made camp in a shallow basin shielded from wind. Yasin pitched a simple tent while Ingrid and Will set out bedrolls, the evening air cooling rapidly. After dinner of simple flatbread and dried fruit, Yasin turned in, leaving them with the starry night stretching overhead. The desert sky was magnificent, countless stars glinting like diamonds in the inky blackness. Ingrid pulled out the talisman, letting it sit on a cloth. Moonlight revealed faint etchings along its edges, as though ancient script circled the stone. Will felt a tremor of emotion. This amulet was both salvation and curse. If it could stop the pendant's threat, it also risked forging a catastrophic link. Ingrid read softly from the litany translations. The mark's bearer stands at the threshold, summoning the parted paths. The talisman's essence merges, severing the Ushkur bond. She trailed off, looking up at the infinite stars. It's like an ancient prayer, bridging mortality and the unknown. Will exhaled. I never expected to be chanting ancient prayers in a desert to stop some apocalyptic relic. But here we are. She met his gaze in the moonlight, a flicker of warmth in her eyes. You've shown remarkable courage, Will. Not many would leap from receiving a cryptic key to braving danger across 2 continents. Maybe that's why the mark chose you. A soft breeze whispered across the dunes. The hush of the desert reminded him of the hush in the mansion's halls, like the world itself held its breath, waiting for the outcome. He forced a reassuring smile, though doubt nagged him. Could he truly harness this talisman, recite an incantation, and outmaneuver ruthless foes? The burden weighed heavily. They parted for rest, Ingrid slipping into her tent. Will lay on a mat under the stars, arms behind his head. Sleep eluded him as he replayed the memories. The unmarked package, the mansion's hidden vault, the intruder's cold sneer, the frantic chase. All culminating here, in a desert older than recorded history. He felt an odd serenity, as though destiny pulsed under the sand. Dawn arrived with a fiery sunrise. They quickly broke camp, Yasin guiding them deeper across shifting dunes. The desert's immensity swallowed them. Ingrid occasionally checked coordinates, then a few hours in, she exclaimed, "That ridge up ahead, I think Katar Oasis lies just beyond." Sure enough, cresting the sandy ridge, they spotted a patch of green far below, a scattering of palm trees, a glimmer of water reflecting the sky. Yasin's face lit in relief. We arrived soon, yet tension crackled. If the thieves were there, so was danger. Yasin drove carefully down the dune slope, approaching the oasis outskirts. They glimpsed old stone ruins near the palm grove. Harrington's diaries described a shrine carved into rock. Ingrid's heart pounded. This must be the place. They parked behind a low mound for cover. Through binoculars, we'll scan the area. He spotted 2 vehicles parked near the ruins, sleek SUVs not typical of local travelers. Figures in black attire milled about, some carrying equipment. A chill pricked his spine. "They're here," he whispered. Ingrid nodded, eyes grave. "We can't just charge in. Let's see what they're doing. We have to confirm the pendant's presence." They snuck closer, instructing Yasin to remain with the jeep, engine ready for a rapid escape. Crouching behind scraggly bushes, Will and Ingrid observed the ruins. They spotted the intruder from Vermont, easily recognizable, directing others to set up lights or markers. A sense of ritualistic preparation pervaded the scene. A glint of metal in the intruder's hand signaled the pendant. When he lifted it, even from a distance, Will felt a jolt, like an invisible ripple in the air. Ingrid's breath caught. He must be testing it here, channeling some energy. A tall, robed figure emerged from behind a partially collapsed column, stepping into view. They wore a hood, face obscured, and carried a staff. The intruder knelt before this robed person, as if deferring to a higher authority. The robed figure lifted arms in a commanding gesture, pointing at a carved altar in the center of the ruins. A hush seemed to descend over the oasis. Ingrid clutched Will's arm. They're about to commence some ceremony, possibly culminating at sunset or nightfall. If we let them proceed, the pendant's power might be unleashed. He nodded, adrenaline thrumming. We have the talisman and the litany. We must disrupt them, but how? We're outnumbered. Ingrid bit her lip, scanning the area. If we wait for the exact moment they try to activate the pendant, that might be our best shot to use the talisman. They'll be fully engaged in their ceremony, hopefully distracted. It was a desperate plan. Infiltrate the ruins at the crucial moment, position the talisman, recite the litany, and rely on the element of surprise. Their success hinged on precise timing and surviving the henchmen's inevitable aggression. They retreated to Yasin, explaining the situation. The driver grew pale, warning them of the group's weapons. Yet he admired their resolve, offering to create a diversion if needed. Will thanked him, touched by the man's unexpected bravery. As the sun climbed higher, they bided their time. The thieves busied themselves around the altar, setting up what looked like ceremonial paraphernalia. The robed figure occasionally examined the pendant, turning it in the sunlight. Ingrid guessed they aimed for a sunset or twilight ritual, symbolically potent in many ancient traditions. As afternoon stretched on, tension mounted. Ingrid quietly rehearsed the litany's words under her breath, ensuring she memorized them. Will tested the talisman's reaction, feeling a low warmth in his palm. A swirl of fear and hope churned in him. Soon, he would face these foes, attempt a recitation older than living memory, and gamble everything on one moment. Clouds gathered overhead, painting the sky in deepening hues. As the intruder and his allies grouped around the altar, they lit torches against the approaching dusk. The robed figure raised the pendant skyward, as if inviting cosmic forces to flow into it. Ingrid and Will saw their window approach. It's now or never, Will murmured. They readied themselves, stepping quietly from cover. Yasin agreed to drive around the far side, revving the Jeep's engine to draw some attention. Meanwhile, Ingrid and Will would slip behind the ruins, aiming to appear at the altar's flank. If fortune favored them, they'd reach the center unopposed, just enough time to deploy the talisman. Ingrid squeezed Will's hand. We do this together. Remember to hold the pendant with the talisman in your grip for the litany to work. He nodded, heart hammering. She could see the fear in his eyes, but also an unwavering resolve. They parted from Yasin's vantage point, creeping into the final confrontation. The hush of the desert pressed upon them, wind picking up grains of sand. Overhead, the swirling clouds painted the last of the daylight in fiery tones. The stage was set for an ancient drama to unfold. Chapter 10. The reckoning dusk transformed the Qatar oasis into a realm of flickering shadows. Torches ringed the stone altar, casting tall silhouettes against the crumbling ruins. The robed figure began a low chant in an archaic tongue. Henchmen stood guard around the perimeter, alert. The intruder from Vermont stood near the robed leader, pendant in hand, face tense with anticipation. Hidden behind a broken wall, Will Smith and Ingrid Whitlock exchanged one last glance. Ingrid gripped the talisman. She whispered, "When we see an opening, we move. Stay close, no matter what." He nodded, adrenaline spiking. 100 scenarios crashed through his mind. Bullets, blades, some arcane backlash. Yet he was here, drawn by a sense of purpose that had solidified since that first mysterious note. They had come too far to retreat. Suddenly, On the far edge of the ruins, the roar of an engine shattered the hush. Yassine's jeep careened over a dune, headlights blazing. Some guards spun, startled. The intruder barked orders. Two men dashed to intercept. Ingrid seized the moment. She and Will sprinted along the perimeter, ducking behind columns until they were within a few yards of the altar. The robed figure continued chanting, raising arms to the sky. The pendant glowed with an eerie light, as though feeding on the incantation. Sparks of energy crackled in the air. Even from a distance, Will felt a static charge prickling his skin. One guard noticed them, shouting an alarm. Ingrid hurled a stone at his head, momentarily stunning him. Will lunged onto the altar platform, just as the intruder whirled, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Ew," the intruder hissed. "You're too late. The pendant is awakening." Will's gaze flicked to the robed figure. The chanting crescendoed, swirling dust forming a vortex around the altar. Ingrid leapt up beside Will, talisman clutched her chest. The intruder brandished the pendant, which blazed with unearthly brilliance. "Look upon its power," he sneered. "Soon it shall reshape the boundaries. Our order will reign supreme. Will steal himself, not if we sever its hold." He lunged forward, grappling for the pendant. The intruder dodged, but Ingrid swung the talisman in a wide arc, pressing it against the glowing stone. For an instant, arcs of bizarre energy danced between them. The intruder cried out, stumbling back. The robed leader hissed, stepping forward with a staff crackling with light. Ingrid braced, brandishing the talisman. Will caught the intruder's wrist, attempting to pry the pendant free. Their eyes locked, an electric tension bridging them. Will felt a wave of malevolence surge from the artifact, gnawing at his resolve. The intruder grinned cruelly, as if the pendant's darkness was fueling him. In a blur, Ingrid slammed the talisman's stone against the pendant, unleashing a shockwave that threw all three backward. The robe leader's staff flared, absorbing some impact. Sand whipped into the air, the altar groaning as if nature itself recoiled. Fighting dizziness, Will crawled forward, his hand landing on the pendant, which pulsed with scorching energy. The intruder moaned a few feet away, stunned. Ingrid pressed the talisman into Will's other hand, voice trembling. "Now, recite the litany." Searing pain stabbed Will's palm as the pendant's power lashed at him. Darkness threatened to swirl in his vision. Yet Ingrid's voice anchored him. He summoned the lines they had memorized from Harrington's diaries and the diaries of Woodvale, shaping them into a single incantation. "By the parted path, we sever the bond. No malice shall dwell. No darkness hold sway. Talisman, arise in unison with the mark. Cast the relic's shadow into light's domain." He chanted, breath quivering. The pendant flared, fighting back. The robed leader howled, raising the staff to strike. Ingrid blocked him with a desperate tackle, sending them both tumbling. The intruder struggled to stand, furious. Will repeated the litany, voice cracking. "Spirit undone, synergy shattered. Return to dust, you twisted power. Through the mark, we bring final peace. Through the talisman, your terror shall cease." A swirl of energy enveloped him, the talisman glowing in one hand, the pendant scorching in the other. He felt both relics pulling at his essence. The pendant strove to corrupt his mind, delving into regrets, anger, anything it could exploit. The talisman strove to shield him, forging a barrier. For a moment, he saw flashes of his life, the quiet yearnings, the joys, the guilt, the hope. The relics waged war within him. Shaking, he forced the final lines out. "Bound no more, fade into oblivion." Ushkur's chain dissolved in righteous will. By the mark's rightful bearer, we reclaim the dawn, sealing darkness with unwavering truth. Thunderous force erupted between his hands. A shockwave expanded across the altar, blowing out torches and flattening the robed leader and the intruder. Cracks splintered the ancient stones. Clouds overhead churned as if the sky itself responded. Will felt a surge of blazing heat, the relics vibrating with fury. Then, in a split second, the light consumed them all. He toppled backward, blacking out for a heartbeat. When his senses returned, the altar was still. Night folded around the scene. The swirling energies were gone, replaced by drifting sand. Ingrid crawled to him, tears in her eyes. "Will? Are you?" He coughed, body aching, though the pendant was no longer scorching. It lay silent in his hand, the talisman pressed against it. Their glow had vanished. The robed leader was sprawled on the ground, unconscious or worse. The intruder knelt, face slack with shock, as if the relic's power had drained from him. A half-dozen henchmen lay scattered, groaning or unconscious. Slowly, Will lifted the pendant. Its gem-like core was cracked dark, no sign of the previous brilliance. The talisman stone was likewise dull, but intact. Ingrid touched the items, relief flooding her features. We sealed it, I think." Behind them, Yasin's jeep roared into the clearing, halting with a skid. Yasin leapt out, wide-eyed at the battered scene. Overhead, the swirling clouds parted, revealing a calm night sky. The hush of the desert returned, as if a cosmic exhalation had ended. Exhausted, Will rolled onto his back, gazing at the stars. Ingrid pressed a trembling hand to his shoulder. Soft footsteps approached, the intruder, battered and dazed, gazing at them with haunted eyes. For a moment, it seemed he might lash out again, but the artifact's hold was gone. He stumbled away into the darkness, ignoring the calls of his battered cohorts. No one had the strength to stop him, nor did they sense any further threat. The relic's destructive potential had dissolved. In time, Yasin helped them gather, scanning the altar for any further sign of the robed leader's intentions. The man remained unconscious, staff broken. The remainders of the group scattered or fled, leaderless. Will wasn't certain what would become of them. Perhaps they'd vanish into the dunes, or be forced to confront the emptiness left by the pendant's loss of power. "Are you sure it's finished?" Ingrid asked, voice barely above a whisper, cradling the talisman. Will studied the cracked pendant, no longer pulsing with malevolence. "It's done. The litany did it. The synergy is broken." A wave of relief coursed through him, tears pricking his eyes. They carefully retrieved the robed figure's staff, discovering its crystal tip had shattered. Harriet's warnings, the diary's prophecies, all pointed to this outcome. The relic's threat ended by the rightful bearer's vow. Yasin hovered, anxious to depart. "We go now," he asked, "before more trouble arrives?" Will nodded. With Ingrid's help, he rose. They left the site, leaving behind the subdued remnants of the intruder's men. Yasin drove them away from the oasis at a deliberate pace, ensuring the dunes swallowed any trace of them. The moon overhead shone serenely, as if absolving the land of the chaos that had nearly erupted. Hours later, they made camp in a safer region far from the ruins. In the flickering light of a small fire, Ingrid cradled the talisman and will gently place the cracked pendant on a cloth. "What now?" she asked softly. He took a breath, exhaustion heavy in his voice. "We ensure these relics never again threaten anyone. Maybe Harriet or a reputable museum can store them securely or bury them somewhere no one would suspect. The important part is that their synergy is broken." She agreed. The diaries had always stressed the pendant's greatest danger was its union with dark intent. With the power severed, it might remain inert, little more than a historical curiosity. Even so, they wouldn't leave it to chance. In time, they'd decide on a plan, possibly involving discreet scholars sworn to secrecy. As dawn approached, Ingrid drifted into an exhausted sleep. Will sat awake, flames dancing in his eyes. He recalled the day he received that odd key in Los Angeles, the moment that set everything in motion. The hush of the desert morning reminded him of the hush in that dusty mansion's corridors. He thought of the diary's talk of the rightful bearer. Perhaps fate or something intangible had chosen him. Yet the story was more than destiny. It was choice, action, courage born from a sense of moral duty. He set the cracked pendant aside, covering it with cloth. Tomorrow, they'd journey back, eventually reuniting with Harriet. The talisman still felt faintly warm, but no longer thrumming with the same urgency. The chapter was ending. He faced the desert sunrise with a heart that, despite the bruises and exhaustion, brimmed with gratitude. He'd risked everything to protect what he might never fully understand, an ancient power that had no place in dark hands. In the shimmering dawn, Will Smith finally let the tension seep away. He'd found a deeper meaning in unexpected adversity, that anyone, even a famous actor, can become a guardian if they answer the call of conscience. The hush of the wind carried secrets of centuries, but for now, the desert slumbered peacefully, the relic's threat subdued. A new day dawned, free from the ancient shadows that had threatened to consume it.